They thought a stranded woman on a freezing Alaskan dock meant the end of my reign. My son and his scheming fiancée smiled as the ship sailed away with my identification and the hard drive containing my life's work. They had no idea they stole a digital time bomb, not the keys to my empire. Let me tell you how a betrayed mother destroyed them on live television, taking absolutely everything away in one single second. Hello to the wonderful audience of James Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated staff to sustain their lives and continue creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments of this video. My name is Delilah Hawkins. I am 48 years old and the founder of Aegis Terra Innovations, a green energy empire that took me 20 years to build from nothing into a corporate titan worth billions of dollars. Until a few hours ago, I was supposed to be enjoying a pristine luxury vacation traversing the icy waters of Alaska. Accompanying me on this extravagant journey were my biological son Preston, who is 25 years old, and his newly minted fiancée, Savannah. The air at the Juneau port was punishingly brutal. A vicious wind whipped off the frozen water, carrying shards of ice that stung my cheeks. The landscape was swallowed in a blanket of blinding white snow, a stark contrast to the colossal dark hull of the luxury cruise ship towering beside the dock. We had docked for a brief shore excursion. Preston had wrapped his arm around my shoulders with a warmth that I now know was entirely manufactured. "Mom, look at that artisan stall right at the end of the pier," Preston had said, his voice dripping with faux enthusiasm. "They have these incredible hand-carved wooden sculptures. You should go grab one for your office. It will only take 5 minutes. Hand me your heavy bag. I will hold it for you so you do not have to drag it through the snow." That heavy leather designer tote contained my entire life, or so he believed. Inside were my passport, my highest-tier black credit cards, and, most importantly, a heavily encrypted biometric hard drive. That small piece of metal was widely known within my company to hold the core patents, the proprietary algorithms, and the unreleased blueprints for our next-generation renewable energy grids. It was the absolute crown jewel of Aegis Terra Innovations. I handed him the bag, stepped off the gangway, and walked toward the stall. I had barely taken 50 steps when the deafening blast of the ship's horn echoed through the glacial valley. I turned around. The heavy steel gangway was already fully retracted. The massive propellers churned the freezing water into white foam as the multi-ton vessel slowly detached from the dock. I stood alone on the icy wooden planks. The freezing wind tore through my cashmere coat, but the chill was nothing compared to the absolute zero temperature settling into my chest. I lifted my gaze to the top tier of the ship, Deck 14. There they were, Preston and Savannah. They were leaning over the glass railing, looking down at me. Preston was not frantically waving to the crew to stop. He was not shouting my name in a panic. Instead, his lips were curled into a slow, deliberate, and victorious smirk. Beside him, Savannah was laughing, her hands clutching a glass of champagne. They truly believed they had just stranded a helpless, undocumented middle-aged woman in the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, while they sailed away with the keys to my kingdom. A normal mother would have collapsed to her knees. A normal corporate executive would have screamed, waved her arms frantically, or begged the port authorities for a radio. I did none of those things. I did not shed a single tear. I did not move a muscle. I simply stood like a statue sculpted from the surrounding ice, watching the ship shrink into a white dot against the vast ocean. What my arrogant son did not know was that I had been watching him for exactly 7 months. I had noticed the microscopic discrepancies in our quarterly financial reports. I had tracked the millions of dollars he had quietly embezzled through dummy shell corporations. I had observed him forming parasitic factions within my own board of directors in Seattle. This luxurious Alaskan cruise was never a family bonding trip. It was a calculated final test to see just how far the darkness in his heart had spread. I needed to know if my own flesh and blood possessed the ruthlessness to completely destroy me. He had just given me his answer. Furthermore, the biometric hard drive resting at the bottom of my stolen designer bag did not contain a single genuine patent. There were no energy blueprints. There were no trade secrets. Instead, it housed a highly sophisticated, custom-built digital honeypot. It was a lethal Trojan virus that I had spent 3 weeks coding with my own hands. It was a digital bear trap waiting for a greedy foot to step on it. Once the cruise ship vanished completely behind a massive glacier, I turned my back on the ocean. I pulled my collar up and began a steady, unhurried walk through the punishing snowstorm. I walked for exactly 2 miles, bypassing the tourist centers and the panicked local port authorities. I arrived at an unmarked, heavily fortified concrete building nestled at the base of a frozen mountain. It was a private climate research facility that I had been secretly funding through a blind trust for 10 years. I stepped up to the reinforced steel door. A hidden scanner read my iris, and the heavy locks disengaged with a satisfying mechanical click. I walked into the cavernous, heated room, shrugging off my snow-covered coat. The facility director wordlessly pointed me toward a secure server room in the back. I sat down in front of a glowing terminal linked directly to a private military-grade satellite network. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, cracked my knuckles, and prepared to initiate the absolute destruction of the empire Preston thought he had just stolen. Aboard the luxury vessel, inside the presidential suite that my personal black card had paid for, the atmosphere was undoubtedly thick with the stench of unearned victory. Preston and Savannah were surely tearing through bottles of vintage champagne that cost over $5,000 a pop. In their small, greedy minds, they had engineered the perfect corporate coup. They pictured me shivering in the sub-zero temperatures, begging a local Port Authority worker for a landline, completely and utterly neutralized. They calculated that without any physical identification, passports, or access to my corporate banking applications, it would take me a minimum of 4 to 5 days to verify my identity to federal authorities and arrange a private charter flight back to Washington State. 5 days was precisely the window Preston needed. It was more than enough time to trigger the emergency executive succession protocols at the Seattle headquarters, citing my sudden, unexplained disappearance in the wilderness to the board of directors. Sitting in the heated bunker, I watched the satellite feed ping on my terminal. Preston had wasted 0 time. He had connected his high-end laptop to the maritime satellite network of the cruise ship. I could practically visualize his smug, self-satisfied grin as he plugged the stolen biometric drive into his universal serial bus port. The terminal screen in front of me perfectly mirrored his desktop interface. A prompt appeared on his screen, demanding a highly complex 16-digit cryptographic key and an authorized fingerprint scan. Preston, fancying himself a prodigy of digital espionage, ran a basic, brute force decryption script he had likely purchased on the dark web for a pathetic couple of $100. He sat back, expecting a grueling, hours-long battle against my legendary cybersecurity defenses. Instead, I had programmed the firewall to put up a theatrical, pathetic resistance for exactly 3 minutes before spectacularly collapsing. When the bright green access granted banner flashed across his screen, his ego must have swollen to the size of the glaciers floating outside his cabin window. He truly believed his mediocre coding skills had outsmarted the architect of a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate. The moment he gained access to the dummy root directory, the feeding frenzy began. His cursor darted across the screen like a starved scavenger. He immediately targeted the European expansion portfolio. With trembling, greedy fingers, he initiated the transfer of our most exclusive renewable energy contracts. These agreements were worth exactly $3.25 billion, representing the next 10 years of municipal power grids across North America. He assigned the intellectual property rights and operational control to a newly minted holding company registered in Geneva. This was a paper-thin shell corporation quietly established by Savannah's aristocratic but entirely financially bankrupt family over 6 months ago. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He was legally looting my legacy, stroke by deliberate stroke on his keyboard, transferring decades of my sweat and blood into the hands of a family whose only talent was spending money they did not earn. While Preston played the role of the master thief, Savannah was busy exercising her newly imagined authority. Through the hidden microphone access I had discreetly tethered to Preston's laptop camera, I listened to the nauseating symphony of her arrogance. "You clumsy idiot!" Savannah shrieked at a terrified cabin steward, her voice echoing sharply through the suite. "This caviar is barely chilled. I'm about to be the wife of the chief executive officer of Aegis Terra. Bring me a fresh tin immediately, and make sure the hospitality manager knows I want you fired before we reach the next port." Her cruelty did not stop at the ship's hospitality staff. As Preston continued his frantic typing, Savannah leaned heavily over his shoulder, her manicured nails tapping aggressively against the glowing screen. "Make sure you terminate Marcus and Elena the exact second we land in Seattle," she commanded, referring to my chief operating officer and head of legal, both of whom had been my flawlessly loyal right hands for over 15 years. "I want those ancient relics cleared out of the building. We need to replace the entire executive board with my father's management consultants. I am not having those loyalist dogs breathing down our necks while we liquidate the green initiatives." They were so utterly intoxicated by their delusions of absolute power that they remained entirely blind to the invisible, digital noose tightening around their throats. They had absolutely no idea that the very millisecond the hard drive was activated, a stealth monitoring protocol embedded deep within the kernel of the drive had awakened. This was not a passive storage device. It was a vicious digital parasite. It was actively recording every single keystroke he made, logging every private encrypted message they sent to their co-conspirators, and capturing the raw data of every illegal transaction packet they initiated. More importantly, it was streaming all of this deeply damning evidence directly back to the secure servers humming quietly in the concrete bunker just inches behind my chair. I was watching their grand heist unfold in pristine real-time high definition. Preston watched his screen with wide, euphoric eyes as the loading bars reached 100%. The screen displayed a satisfying confirmation that the massive assets had been successfully routed to the Swiss accounts. He probably popped another champagne cork in celebration. However, what his amateur, greedy eyes failed to realize was that the destination routing numbers had been dynamically scrambled the exact moment he hit the enter key. The massive fortune he thought he had successfully embezzled across international borders had never actually left my jurisdiction. Instead, every single contract, every digital dollar, and every proprietary algorithm was being seamlessly diverted and locked into an inescapable decoy escrow account. I controlled absolutely every parameter of that account. He was not robbing the bank. He was meticulously loading the stolen goods directly into the trunk of my police cruiser, firmly believing he had engineered the perfect, untraceable getaway. Exactly 6 days had passed since the cruise ship disappeared over the horizon. Preston had flown back to Seattle on a private charter jet, wrapping himself in the false cape of a grieving son and a reluctant corporate savior. The annual Aegis Terra Innovations Global Summit was the perfect stage for his grand theft. The main auditorium at our headquarters was packed to capacity with over 5,000 shareholders, prominent tech journalists, and ruthless Wall Street executives. Millions more were tuning in live across every major financial television network in the country. Preston stood center stage under the blinding white spotlights, absorbing the attention like a sponge. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that undoubtedly cost over $10,000. He stepped up to the podium, lowered his head, and allowed his shoulders to shake with a perfectly rehearsed sob. "It is with a shattered heart that I must announce the sudden, unexplained disappearance of our founder, my beloved mother," he lied, his voice echoing mournfully through the massive hall. The crushing psychological weight of running this empire finally broke her during our private retreat in the Alaskan wilderness. Search and rescue teams are currently scouring the frozen glaciers, but as of this morning, local authorities presume she is completely lost to the elements. He paused to wipe a dry eye with a silk handkerchief. The audacity of his performance was almost poetic. However, grief does not drive corporate stock prices up, and Preston knew that intimately. Within a matter of seconds, his somber, mourning tone vanished entirely, replaced by the aggressive, high-energy charisma of a sociopathic salesman. "But," he declared, spreading his arms wide, "Aegis Terra cannot simply pause. My mother would want us to push forward into a brighter future. Today, as your newly appointed acting chairman, I am officially opening the funding rounds for Project Apex." Project Apex was an absolute ghost. It was a massive, completely fabricated virtual energy initiative designed solely to siphon fresh venture capital directly into the Swiss shell accounts he and Savannah had established. He confidently walked the captivated audience through beautiful, entirely fake, three-dimensional renderings of offshore wind farms and next-generation battery grids that simply did not exist. He boldly asked the audience for an immediate, initial capital injection of $2 billion to revolutionize the global power network. The Wall Street sharks sitting in the front rows were taking furious notes, utterly captivated by the polished billion-dollar deception unfolding before their eyes. 3,000 miles away, inside the subterranean concrete bunker in Juneau, the air was deadly quiet. I sat bathed in the cold blue light of the main server terminal, watching his entire theatrical performance stream in flawless high definition. The mug of black coffee in my hand had gone completely cold hours ago, but I took a slow sip anyway, letting the bitter taste sharpen my absolute focus. My fingers hovered over the heavy mechanical keyboard. I had spent the last 48 hours seamlessly bypassing the secondary firewalls my own engineering teams had erected around the broadcast systems. I had systematically isolated the Seattle auditorium from their internal control rooms, locking out the production staff. They were flying completely blind, entirely at my mercy. I typed a single, decisive string of code. It was the master override protocol, a highly classified backdoor I had embedded deep within the company network architecture a decade ago for an absolute emergency scenario. This was exactly that emergency. "We are standing on the precipice of a new era," Preston bellowed confidently into his headset microphone, raising a clenched fist toward the ceiling. "An era where Aegis Terra will not just generate power. We will control power." He paused, flashing a brilliant smile, waiting for the thunderous applause he felt he so richly deserved. He never got it. At that exact microsecond, I hit the enter key. The execution was flawless and completely instantaneous. Every single spotlight in the massive Seattle auditorium slammed shut. The cavernous hall was plunged into absolute terrifying darkness for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the monolithic 60-foot LED screen directly behind Preston abruptly flashed back to life. It did not display the beautiful blue and green corporate graphics of Project Apex. Instead, it ignited in a blinding, violent shade of warning red. A low, synthetic bass tone vibrated violently through the floorboards of the auditorium, causing the massive crowd to gasp in collective shock. Preston whipped around, his face suddenly pale in the harsh crimson glow. He furiously tapped his earpiece, demanding answers from a control booth that was no longer responding to his commands. The glaring red screen flickered heavily, and then, looming 50 feet tall over the entire stage, my face appeared. The high-resolution camera in the Alaskan bunker captured my cold, unyielding expression in razor-sharp detail. My image was not just dominating the physical auditorium. The override protocol was simultaneously hijacking the live feeds of every single financial news channel broadcasting the event worldwide. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the profound, suffocating quiet of 5,000 people holding their breath at the exact same moment. I leaned forward into the microphone on my metal desk. My voice boomed fiercely through the state-of-the-art surround sound system of the auditorium, shaking the very foundation of the building. "The only era ending today, Preston, is yours." He froze completely. The remaining color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified child caught directly in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "I am Delilah Hawkins," I announced to the paralyzed auditorium and the millions of investors watching from home. "And I am very much alive. Effective immediately. I am executing my unchallengeable rights as the majority shareholder. Preston is hereby stripped of all executive titles, board memberships, and access to any Aegis Terra properties worldwide." Before Preston could even open his mouth to form a pathetic, stuttering excuse, I initiated the second phase of the digital strike. I split the giant screen directly behind him. On the left side, my live feed remained fixed. On the right side, I projected the damning, undeniable reality of his deceit for the entire financial sector to scrutinize. Massive, irrefutable documents began cascading rapidly down the screen. I displayed the highly classified source code of the Trojan virus he had so arrogantly activated on the cruise ship. I broadcasted the unredacted bank statements showing his attempted embezzlement of over $3 billion. I showed the shell company registrations bearing the explicit signatures of Savannah's family members. Project Apex is a carefully constructed mirage. My voice echoed across the hall, completely devoid of any maternal warmth. The man standing before you is not a visionary leader. He is a common thief who attempted to weaponize my legacy to steal $2 billion of your money today, and he abandoned his own mother on a freezing Arctic dock to do it. The instant those final words echoed through the massive auditorium, the tension that had been suffocating the room violently shattered. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted among the 5,000 attendees. Furious Wall Street executives leapt from their velvet chairs, their face twisted in rage. They began aggressively shouting at the stage, frantically dialing their brokerage firms, demanding the immediate withdrawal of every single cent they had ever invested in the company. The roar of the crowd was deafening, a tidal wave of panic and fury crashing down onto the stage. Preston stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant facade he had worn just 60 seconds ago had entirely melted away. He frantically tapped the side of his headset, desperate to regain control of the narrative. He opened his mouth and began shouting into the microphone, pleading with the enraged investors to listen to him. He waved his hands wildly, screaming that this was an elaborate hoax, a deepfake generated by corporate rivals. But not a single sound came through the towering line array speakers. I had remotely severed the audio feed to his microphone the moment I finished my sentence. He was nothing but a silent, panicked mime, flailing helplessly before a mob of billionaires whose money he had just tried to steal. From my bunker thousands of miles away, I watched his pathetic display and felt absolutely no pity. It was time to deliver the killing blow, to completely sever the last thread of delusion he clung to. "Before you are escorted off my stage, Preston, there is one final piece of business," my voice boomed once again, slicing through the chaotic roar of the auditorium and forcing the room into a tense hush. "You threw away your mother, your inheritance, and your entire future for a woman you believed was your partner in crime. Let us hear what Savannah truly thinks of her brilliant chief executive officer." I triggered the audio file I had extracted from the stealth monitoring protocol just 48 hours prior. It was a pristine, high-definition recording captured directly from the microphone of his laptop while he was out of the suite. Savannah's shrill, unmistakable voice echoed loudly across the auditorium. "Are you kidding me?" Savannah laughed through the speakers, speaking to an unknown friend on a satellite call. "Preston is a complete idiot. He actually believes I love him. The moment we get married and he secures his mother's trusts, I am transferring 75% of his liquid assets into my offshore accounts. I will bleed him completely dry within 6 months and file for divorce. I will be living in Monaco, and he will be too stupid to even realize what happened until I am gone." The camera zoomed in on Preston. The devastating impact of the recording hit him physically. His knees buckled slightly. He slowly turned his head toward the front row, where Savannah was sitting in a designated VIP section. She was trapped in the glare of the spotlights, her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with sheer terror as thousands of people turned to stare at her with utter disgust. The marriage he had sold his soul for was nothing but a shallow, predatory scam. But I was not finished. While the audience absorbed the shock of the audio tape, I executed the next sequence of commands. As of this exact moment, I announced to the room, the federal authorities have formally launched a massive criminal fraud investigation. I have granted them unrestricted access to the dummy accounts. Simultaneously, the personal smartphone in Preston's pocket began vibrating violently. He pulled it out with trembling fingers. The live broadcast feed captured the screen mirroring onto the main LED wall behind him. A barrage of automated notifications flooded in. His platinum credit cards were declined. His corporate accounts were locked. His multi-million-dollar trust funds were suspended. The central bank had automatically frozen every single financial asset attached to his Social Security number. The billions he thought he had stolen were an illusion, but the complete and total freezing of his real money was brutally real. In the span of a single minute, the man who had stood on that stage demanding $2 billion was now completely destitute, unable to even buy a cup of coffee. "Security," I commanded, my voice sharp and unyielding. "Remove the trespassers from my building." Immediately, a dozen members of my elite corporate security team, dressed in immaculate dark suits, marched swiftly up the stairs to the stage. They did not treat him with the deference owed to a chairman. They surrounded him tightly. The lead officer reached out and physically ripped the chief executive officer badge directly from the lapel of his $10,000 suit. Flashbulbs from hundreds of press cameras exploded rapidly, capturing every agonizing second of his humiliation. They grabbed him by the arms and began frog-marching him toward the side exit. Down in the front row, the situation devolved even further. Savannah leapt out of her chair, her elegant poise entirely shattered. As security officers approached her, she completely lost her mind. She pointed a trembling finger at the stage, screaming hysterically at the top of her lungs, uncaring that she was being broadcast live to millions of viewers. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, desperately trying to distance herself from the sinking ship. "This was all his idea. Preston forced me to do it. He said if I did not help him set up the Swiss accounts, he would ruin my family. I am a victim. He is a monster." She was viciously tearing him apart, abandoning him the exact same way he had abandoned me in the freezing snow. But her desperate, pathetic performance was abruptly cut short. From the back of the auditorium, 4 men wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across the back pushed their way through the chaotic crowd. They bypassed the standard security guards and marched directly toward Savannah. The audience watched in stunned silence as the lead federal agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Savannah stopped screaming, staring at the agents in pure confusion. She thought she was being arrested as an accomplice to Preston's corporate espionage. She was wrong. "Savannah," the federal agent announced, his voice carrying clearly into the nearby press microphones. "You are under arrest. Not for corporate fraud, but for severe violations of international tax law. We have received an anonymous, highly encrypted data drop containing 10 years of undeniable proof that your entire family operates a massive international tax evasion syndicate." I watched the color drain from her face one final time. I had not just dismantled Preston. During my time analyzing the stolen data in the Alaskan bunker, I had followed the digital trail of her family's shell corporations and forwarded the entire, fully compiled dossier directly to the United States Department of the Treasury. I had destroyed her entire corrupt bloodline. As the heavy metal cuffs snapped tightly around her wrists, the flashing cameras went into an absolute frenzy. Preston and Savannah, the king and queen of the stolen empire, were dragged out of the auditorium in complete disgrace, their pathetic reign extinguished forever. Exactly 48 hours after the disastrous keynote, I touched down in Washington State on my private jet. The atmosphere at the Seattle headquarters was electric. As I walked through the towering glass doors of the main lobby, a spontaneous, thunderous wave of applause washed over me. Hundreds of my genuine, hard-working employees lined the massive atrium. These were not the useless sycophants my son had courted. These were the brilliant engineers and tireless managers who had actually built Aegis Terra. I did not smile, but I nodded, acknowledging their unwavering loyalty. I immediately marched up to the executive boardroom and initiated the most ruthless internal purge in our corporate history. Every single parasitic manager Preston had installed, every board member who had turned a blind eye to his embezzlement, was fired on the spot. I stripped them of their equity and had security escort them out of the building with absolutely zero severance. In their place, I elevated the quiet, brilliant minds who had been working tirelessly in the trenches for over 15 years. I was not just cleaning house. I was rebuilding the foundation of my empire with unbreakable steel. Of course, the rats desperately tried to fight back. Savannah's aristocratic family, terrified by the federal indictments I had triggered, attempted to flex their remaining political muscle. Her father, a man who mistakenly thought his old family money could intimidate a self-made titan, had his highly paid lawyers draft a threatening settlement offer. He demanded I publicly retract my accusations and drop my active cooperation with the federal agents, subtly implying he had powerful friends in the state senate who could make my business operations very difficult. My response was swift and merciless. I scheduled a secure video call directly with him. "Listen to me very carefully," I told him, staring directly through the camera lens with cold detachment. "I currently possess 300 gigabytes of raw, unencrypted data detailing exactly how you funneled $65 million through a Cayman Island shell company over the last 5 years. If your family does not completely sever all ties with my son and publicly cancel that absolute sham of an engagement within the next 2 hours, I will personally hand-deliver those hard drives to the Director of the Internal Revenue Service." They broke immediately. By noon, a panicked press release hit the major financial networks announcing that Savannah's family was deeply appalled by Preston's actions and that the wedding was permanently canceled. They cowardly threw him to the wolves to save their own sinking ship. Meanwhile, Preston had managed to secure a temporary release on bail, fronted by a desperate loan shark who foolishly believed my son still had access to hidden offshore funds. But Preston stepped out of the county jail into a world that had completely erased him. His mobile phone was dead. His bank accounts were frozen solid. The underground creditors quickly realized he was utterly penniless and began actively hunting him down to collect the massive debts he had accumulated while playing the role of a billionaire playboy. I received satisfying reports of him trying to enter the exclusive country clubs and high-end restaurants where he used to hold court, expecting his usual obsequious treatment. Instead, he was immediately recognized and physically thrown out onto the pavement by security guards who had thoroughly enjoyed watching the live broadcast of his downfall. He was left to wander the freezing, rain-slicked streets of Seattle in the exact same wrinkled, ruined designer suit he had worn on stage. For the first time in his 25 years of life, he realized a terrifying truth. He possessed absolutely zero practical survival skills. He had never worked a single day for his wealth, and without my formidable name shielding him, he was just a helpless boy freezing in the dark. Late that evening, long after the office had completely emptied, I stood alone in my penthouse office on the 75th floor. I held a glass of premium bourbon, looking down through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering city lights sprawling out below me. For decades, I had carried the heavy, blind assumption that shared blood automatically equaled unwavering loyalty. I had let maternal sentiment blind me to a lethal, greedy cancer growing right beside me. But as I watched the headlights moving silently along the distant highway, the last lingering traces of my maternal grief completely evaporated. Letting go of my son was not a tragedy. It was a strictly necessary surgical extraction. I had amputated a highly necrotic tumor to save the living, breathing body of my company. Over 20,000 employees and their families depended on my strength, my vision, and my ruthless protection. I simply could not afford the fatal weakness of unconditional love for a monster. I took a slow sip of the burning liquid, feeling the absolute, pristine clarity of a woman who had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged completely untouchable. It seemed the dust had finally settled on this corporate war, but I had severely underestimated the sheer desperation of a cornered animal. At exactly midnight on a freezing Tuesday, my secure phone rang. It was an automated alert from the lowest sub-level of the Seattle headquarters. Preston had somehow retained a highly classified, archaic physical master key from his early days as an intern, and he had used it to bypass the biometric scanners of the subterranean server vault. I immediately accessed the internal security feed. There he was. My son looked completely deranged, his expensive suit now torn and stained with street grime. He was standing in the center of the massive, chilled room, holding a heavily modified electromagnetic pulse device directly over the central data racks. He stared right into the security camera, knowing I would be watching. "Listen to me very carefully, Mother," he panted, his voice trembling with manic energy through the audio feed. "I know how this room works. If I press this trigger, a massive magnetic wave will instantly wipe every single exabyte of Aegis Terra backup data. Decades of research, gone. I will completely erase this company from existence. I want $10 million in untraceable cash brought down here in the next 30 minutes. And I want a private helicopter fueled and waiting on the roof to take me across the border. If you call the police," I pressed the button. The stakes felt paralyzingly high. To an outside observer, it would seem like the ultimate stalemate. I did not call the local police precinct. Instead, I took the private elevator down 75 floors, entirely alone. The heavy steel doors of the vault slid open with a mechanical hiss. The freezing air of the server room hit my face. Preston whipped around, his thumb hovering dangerously over the red detonator switch. His eyes were completely bloodshot, darting around the room like a trapped rat. "Where is the money?" he screamed, his voice cracking violently. "I swear to God, I will do it. I have absolutely nothing left to lose. Give me the $10 million or your precious legacy dies tonight." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the cooling fans. I stood motionless, staring at the pathetic, broken man in front of me. Then, a sound escaped my lips that completely shattered his fragile reality. I laughed. It was not a warm sound. It was a cold, hollow echo that bounced off the metal walls. Preston lowered the device a fraction of an inch, pure confusion washing over his exhausted face. "What is so funny? I'm going to destroy everything." "You really think I would leave the beating heart of my empire unguarded after you already tried to stab it once?" I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "Preston, you are standing in a graveyard. Exactly 1 week ago, while you were still trying to explain yourself to the loan sharks, I quietly partnered with the United States Department of Defense. Every single authentic server in this entire facility was physically uprooted, loaded onto heavily armored military transports, and permanently relocated to an impenetrable subterranean bunker in Western Europe." His mouth fell open. He looked frantically at the blinking lights on the racks surrounding him. "What you are looking at is a hollow shell," I continued, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "Those machines are running looping decoy data, and that master control terminal you have your pulse device wired to, that is the central node for the building's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. You are threatening to permanently disable the air conditioning, Preston. That is the absolute extent of your grand villainous masterstroke." He gasped, stumbling backward until his spine hit a metal rack. "Furthermore," I added, raising my hand and pointing to a small, nearly invisible black dome hidden in the corner of the ceiling, "you demanded I not call the police. I did not have to. That highly concealed camera has been broadcasting a live, unencrypted feed directly to the federal agents who have been tracking your every movement since you skipped bail. They are standing right outside that door." Before he could even process the magnitude of his failure, the heavy steel doors violently exploded inward. A dozen heavily armed federal agents flooded the room, their tactical flashlights blinding him. They tackled him to the freezing concrete floor, violently ripping the useless detonator from his trembling hands. As the cold steel of the handcuffs locked around his wrists, Preston completely broke. The manic facade shattered, and he was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating child. He dragged himself across the floor, his fingers desperately grabbing the hem of my coat. "Mom, please," he sobbed uncontrollably, tears streaming down his dirty face. "Please, I am your son. I am your blood. Forgive me. Just this once. Please be my mother." I looked down at the pathetic creature clutching my shoes. I felt absolutely nothing. No grief, no anger, just a profound, overwhelming emptiness. I slowly pulled my foot back, forcing his hands to slip away from my coat. "I gave you the entire world," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a judge rendering a final verdict. "And you chose the handcuffs for yourself." I turned my back and walked out of the vault, never looking behind me as his agonizing screams faded into the distance. The justice system was not lenient. Facing a mountain of federal extortion, wire fraud, and corporate espionage charges, Preston was sentenced to 45 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He will grow old and wither away in a concrete cell, entirely forgotten by the world he tried to conquer. As for his expected inheritance, the billions of dollars that would have funded his life of unearned luxury, I permanently redirected every single cent. I established a global scholarship foundation designed to fund the education of brilliant, underprivileged engineering students who actually possess the drive and moral character to change the world. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof that a true legacy does not lie in the ungrateful, toxic individuals who happen to share your bloodline. A real legacy is built upon the undeniable good we leave behind for the future. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and listened to my story today. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and meaningful, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Your generous support is exactly what allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and giving us the ability to continue creating and sharing these incredible stories with you. Thank you again, and take care.